Hi, so when you're using kits on the Deluge, you get a pretty great and flexible sample-based drum machine, but you can not only load samples into a kit, you can also use the Deluge's internal synth engine. So I thought it'd be a nice experiment to see what kinds of percussive sounds I can come up with only using the internal synth engine. First off, let me say, you probably get better and quicker results just using some good samples, but if you're interested in drum synthesis and or how the synth engine of the Deluge works, this might nevertheless be of interest to you. So let's get started. I'm making a new kit. I'm holding Shift and pressing Kit for this. So I get an empty kit, but instead of loading in a sample, I'm going to hold this first edition pad and press Synth. And now I'm getting a synth voice on this kit row. So let me start with a simple kick drum. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here. I'll use a sine wave for this. I go to Type and choose Sine. Now it's a kick, so I want to make it lower. Something like this. Now for a typical kick, there's going to be pitch modulation by an envelope. So I'm doing just that. The transpose shortcut is already blinking, so I'm holding the pad and choosing envelope 2 to modulate the transposition of oscillator 1. Maybe something like this. But I want this to happen faster, so I'm adjusting envelope 2. I'm setting the attack to 0. So it doesn't go up first, it goes straight from up to down. And the fall should be faster, so I'm decreasing the decay. Something like this. Now, while I'm at it, I'm gonna adjust envelope 1 as well, the amp envelope. I want the sound to be a bit shorter, and it's a kick drum, so I don't really need sustain. I could, but in this case I don't want to. Maybe the decay a bit longer. Now you hear this clicking in the very beginning. This is because the sine wave of oscillator 1 is just constantly oscillating, doing its sine wave thing. And when I trigger the amp, there's no telling of where in its cycle the sine wave is. So it could be at a 0 crossing, or it could be all the way up on a peak. That's why we're getting the clicking. The Deluge has a re-trigger phase setting, which is useful in just this occasion. So what this means is now it's set to off, it's not doing anything. If I turn this on and set it to 0, every time I trigger the amp, the oscillator's waveform also resets at a 0 crossing in this case. So the clicking is gone. Now the more I increase this, the further apart from the 0 point the waveform starts, which means the clicking gets more and more audible until we reach a peak at 90 degrees, and then it's going back down to 0 at 180, and then down, and then at 360 we've completed one cycle. I will leave this at 10, so we get a little bit of a click because I think that's nice, but not too much. Now, one thing that's nice for a kick is to give it a little bit of a low-end boost using a high-pass filter. So I'm going to go to the high-pass filter, increase the resonance, And then I'm just looking for a nice spot. Now let's hear what this sounds like if we sequence a 4 to the floor thing here. Maybe the pitch envelope could be a bit faster. And let's see what some saturation sounds like here. Yeah, this is nice. Now, one last thing I'm going to try is to add a tiny little bit of noise in the very beginning. So for this, I'm going to turn on the noise. It sounds also kind of nice, just like that, but I want it only at the very beginning. So I'm going to maybe modulate this with the pitch envelope, which is really super fast. This doesn't seem to work the way I want it to. So I'm going to use the filter. Without the noise, there's really no need to filter it because it's just a sine wave and there's nothing up there anyways. But with the noise, I can open up the filter with envelope 2. Increase the modulation amount a bit. Yeah, that sounds about right to me. So next, let's try to build a snare. Now, for lots of percussion instruments, it's nice to have many oscillators so we can enharmonically detune them. But we only have 2 here, so the best option is to go with FM. But I'm not going to use the FM mode here on the Deluge because if I do that, I unfortunately am losing the filters. So instead, I'm going to FM the 2 oscillators with the LFOs, which luckily go fast enough to be able to do that. So I'm starting by making another synth instrument. And again, I'm choosing a sine wave. Sine. I'm making this low again because even though sometimes we forget about that, a snare is a pretty low sounding drum. It's just all that sizzle that makes it sound really trebly. So maybe -20 or something. And then I'm going to modulate the pitch using LFO2. I'll go all the way up here to start. And of course, I have to make this faster. So I'm setting it to 50, which gives us a nice FM sound. Now, again, I have to adjust the envelope because, of course, this is a percussive instrument. So setting the decay to something short and the sustain this time. Yeah, it sounds kind of drum-like. I'm not going to set it all the way to 0 here because even though a snare doesn't have a sustain stage, this allows me to kind of build a more flexible envelope, one that first goes down really quickly from the maximum amplitude and then fades out very slowly during the release stage because the triggers are going to be short anyway, so it doesn't really matter that there's a short sustain stage. So I'm turning up the release to something like this. So next I'm going to add oscillator 2 and give it a slightly different tuning. Now I'm also going to FM this sound using LFO2. Now because the LFO2 has a fixed frequency and the oscillators are tuned differently, the ratio I get is completely different even though I'm using the same LFO. Now, next I'm gonna add some noise, of course, because there's lots of noise in a snare sound. Now, I'm gonna adjust the mix of oscillator 1 and 2 against the noise. Now I'm going to use the low pass filter to boost some frequencies. Yeah. I like the bottom frequency that the drum has. This sounds kind of like a snare drum to me. Now I'm gonna modulate the pitch of, probably oscillator 1 only, with envelope 2. So it wobbles a little bit in the beginning, so it gets that boing sound you usually get when you hit a drum. I'm going negative, so it goes up from an initial value. So I'm setting the attack of envelope 2 to 0, so I can hear it. Let's do it a little bit more. Maybe for same thing for envelope 2. Or let's go the opposite direction for. Maybe a bit of saturation too here. So let's do hi-hats next. I'm going about this more or less the same way. Going to do FM using the LFOs because here we're definitely going to need the high-pass filter. I'm making a new instrument. This time I think I'm gonna go with the square because we can use lots of harmonics for the hi-hat, and this time I'm gonna I make it a little bit quieter just because of my ears, and this time I'm gonna tune it up instead of down. Even higher. And then I'm gonna FM with LFO 2. Isn't that a nice sound? I'm doing the same thing for oscillator 2. This time I'm gonna FM it with LFO 1. And I'll set this to a slightly different speed. So we get lots of different pitches in there. I'm also going to adjust the pulse width a little bit of the two for even more shrill sounds. So here comes the high pass filter. And then the envelope here, it's going to be a closed hi-hat first. So it needs to be just super short. Yeah, even shorter on 1 is good. Then I'm going to add some noise. Yeah, and this sounds pretty hi-hatty to me. For the open hi-hat, I'm going to just replicate the patch pretty much and then just increase the decay time. Now with hi-hats, the Deluge has a neat feature in the polyphony setting. You can choose choke, which means that these voices will cancel each other out. So if this if this guy comes in, this will mute. So there's the open hat. Now next, let's make a kind of a shaker. This should be very simple. I'm making a new synth voice. This time I'm turning oscillator 1 all the way down. I'm just going to use the noise. Turning the sustain all the way down and increasing the attack a bit. And a release maybe too. High pass filter. Bit of resonance. Less resonance. Sure. Yeah, something like that. One thing I like to do is randomize the attack time a little bit to give it a more human feel. Especially once you go full 16ths. It's too long now. Adjusting the high pass filter. Maybe I'm going to use the low pass filter as well. I'll set it to 12 dB to make it softer. Let's see what resonance does for the high pass, the low pass filter. High pass filter again. Something like this. I'm guessing this should sound nice with some delay. Or even pan. Randomize the panning. Yeah, that's pretty nice. So lastly, let's try making some toms, and why not use the FM synth engine this time. So I'm gonna hit synth, and I'm gonna go to synth mode. I'm gonna choose FM. Now we already got the nice sine wave here, which is cool. I'm gonna mix in oscillator 2. And transpose it maybe a fifth apart. I'm gonna adjust the amp envelope because this also is gonna be a drum sound, so I'm gonna do a similar thing like I did on the snare. I'm gonna set the sustain really low, but not all the way to 0. Increase the release and make the decay short. I'm also setting the re-trigger phase to 0 here to get rid of the clicking. And now maybe I want to make all of this a bit lower. I'm going to detune this to something really off. Maybe we'll get the really low sounds with the FM mod. So I'm going to turn this up. I'm gonna turn FM mod 2 up as well. And now I'm gonna use the envelopes to modulate the FM amount. In this case, I think it's not wrong to just use the amp envelope. Let's see what happens if we send FM mod 2 to the mod 1. So this means this guy is modulating the modulator, which is modulating oscillator 1. Again here, I'm setting the phase, the starting point of the phase of the wave to something other than 0 to get a little bit of a click. I'm going to see if I can, yeah, more of a boing if I go negative here. Well, not the greatest tom ever, but it is one. I'm going to try and make one, a lower one. Maybe let's see if we can do this one also by using the subtractive synth because of the filters. Oh, I have to change this to sine wave, and it's not going to sound so weird. Also adding a bit of modulation from envelope 1. I'm going to bring in oscillator 2. Also with the sine wave. I'm going to adjust the pulse width of this sine wave. I'm going to show you afterwards what exactly this does, but it's kind of cool because it adds some harmonics. And since I still have the filter available, low pass filter 12 dB. I can get rid of the excessive amount that I don't want. Let me adjust this amp envelope so it's more, sounds more like a tom. I'm using the high pass filter with some resonance to bring out like the fundamental of the drum. Now I'm getting a nice boom. But up high, not so nice yet. Yeah. Now, if the gate is longer than the decay stage, it is short, the sound. If it's shorter, the gate, than the decay stage, it goes to the release stage and it's longer. It's just a bit weird. Let me show you. So I'm almost done here. I've got the main parts of a regular drum kit. Of course, this is more the kind of synthesis people did 50 years ago, where they thought synthesizers were supposed to replicate acoustic instruments. Nevertheless, I think it's interesting just to think about how to get to those kinds of sounds and how we can make them by using the tools available in a box like this. Now I have this one last row left to fill, and I'm going to do that and put some wacko sound in there. But before I do that, I have one side note or end note on the topic of the pulse width parameter here, which is available for all waveforms and not just the square. And I wondered many times what exactly it does until today I finally got curious enough to have a closer look at it. And I just want to show you what it does. For this, let me create a new synth. I'm going to load in a sine wave. And then I'm getting out the oscilloscope so you can actually see what this looks like. This is our sine wave. Maybe I can even sequence this guy so I don't have to hold down that pad all the time. This is our sine wave, and if I adjust the pulse width, we can see that the frequency of the sine wave is actually increasing, but it's kind of hard synced to the frequency this oscillator is supposed to play. So if I go all the way up to 50, I get twice the same sine wave. And we hear a pitch 1 octave above the one we had before. Kind of cool, isn't it? Just to make my point about it being hard synced to the frequency we're wanting to play on the keyboard or on the pads here, let me show you what the waveform looks like if I have two sine waves and hard sync them to each other, turning down the volume of oscillator 1 and turning up oscillator of volume of oscillator 2. So now if I increase the frequency of oscillator 2, you can see it's the exact same thing that's happening. It's the same thing, by the way, for all waveforms. Let's have a look at the triangle. Pulse width. And the square, obviously. Just this regular pulse width. So looks like this. So I hope you found this as interesting as I did. So let's go back to this last row, make it a synth, and let's just do some crazy modulation. Maybe I'm gonna start out with modulating this pitch, kind of like we did with the FM stuff, but this time I'm going to modulate the rate of LFO2 with an envelope. And then maybe add some filtering to this too. Maybe the high frequency filter, same envelope. Maybe pulse width too on the same envelope. Give it a different wave shape. Do some regular LFO pulse width modulation too. Let's see what we can do with the low pass filter. Some resonance. That's kind of cool. So I'm giving this to envelope 1 maybe. It's cool because the filter closes on the release stage. See if we can make this a bit faster. And now we haven't even touched the second oscillator yet. So let's do that. Fifth apart. But maybe go with the same pitch mod. And add some delay. This is just fun. Maybe some unison and some noise. And some distortion. So this was the fun bit for the end. I'll leave you with that. I hope you found this interesting. Of course, this isn't the greatest sounding kit ever, but for me at least, it was interesting to make this and kind of gave me some insights into the synth engine of the Deluge. Made me think about stuff like the pulse width or how those envelopes behave. Yeah. So thank you a lot for watching. I'm guessing this will turn out to be a rather long one, and I'm glad you made it to the end.
Wow.